Well, we got a bunch of wow, people are sometimes it takes a minute for people to roll in from the waiting room, but we're rolling in fast today. Wow, look at that. Cool. It's so funny. It's like really opening the doors, opening the gates. Oh,
Oh,
here's
there's
Henry.
Henry.
Hi, Henry. Hello, Henry. Thank you for making it. All right, we're gonna give it just a few minutes, yeah, maybe just a few seconds, because it looks like we're getting pretty rapid coming in from the waiting room here. All right, let's go ahead and kick everything off. Thank you all for being here on Friday during a heat wave, during day 5 of Creative Industries Week. We're so excited to be joined by some very heavy hitters. I'm very excited about this panel. And for those of you who haven't been just glued to your computer screens all week. This is Creative Industries Week. And my name is Mike, and I work for an organization called Creative Startups. And we are working with the New Mexico Economic Development Department to craft a strategic plan for the new Creative Industries Division, which is a very exciting new division that is designed to support folks making a living in the creative economy. And there are a lot of questions around that. And we've been trying to sort of answer some of those questions in different ways all week. But what I'm really excited about with the folks on this panel today is I think we're going to be able to tell a story of what exactly that means and how the Creative Industries Division helps individual creatives on their journey um, from just, quote unquote, starting out as just an individual artist and some of the programs that already exist to support individual artists, all the way through figuring out how to protect their work um, through the legal mechanisms, how to scale and grow businesses with the support of financial institutions, and how to join a larger movement to advocate for the rights and prosperity of creatives across the state. And I think I think the folks on this panel are all brilliant and are going to really help us give a clear picture of that story. So I'm very excited to introduce and I think we've been sort of doing it in alphabetical order, but I'm going to switch things up a little bit for this one, just to sort of follow that storyline. And so the first person I'm going to introduce, I'm very excited to have with us Michelle LaFlamme-Childs, who is the executive director of New Mexico Arts and is going to tell us a little bit about what New Mexico Arts does and what the Department of Cultural Affairs already does. And there's a lot of exciting stuff that is already out there for artists, for nonprofits, a lot of hard work that's been done for many years by the DCA and New Mexico Arts and Michelle. So very happy to have her with us today to tell us about some of that. And so welcome, Michelle. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Did you want me to start or did you want to
Yeah, I
introduce
think let's start. I think we'll go. Actually, you're right. You're right. Let's introduce everybody very quickly and then we'll dive into it. So, in addition to Michelle, we will go in alphabetical order. We've got Max Haas, who is a founding partner at Holon Law Partners and is a specialist in intellectual property and entertainment law, and is going to be able to talk to us a little bit specifically around some very basic outlines of issues with things like AI and whatnot, which we're really, really all concerned about. And Max is going to be able to tell us a little bit about that. Very happy to be joined by Max. Let's see. Oh, I read the J as the last name, so I messed up my alphabetical order. But Henry Jake Foreman is here, program director at New Mexico Community Capital, which is a really awesome organization. And I think Henry just got back into town from a Google conference where he was speaking. So that's very cool. He's going to tell us about scaling and businesses. And then we've got very excited to be joined by LAURIE RUFE, Vice President of Creative New Mexico, which was the advocacy group that played a huge part in getting this division established back in 3 years of work. So LAURIE is going to tell us a little bit about that. Maybe more than 3, but just some great organization. And LAURIE's going to tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about I should say artists and creatives can do to join together to advocate collectively. So that's everybody here. Very excited to be joined. I'm going to kick it over to Michelle to sort of start us off. Let's, individual artists and creatives sitting there figuring out what to do. She's going to tell us about New Mexico arts.
Thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be on screen with these amazing folks. So thank you for inviting me to participate. New Mexico Arts is what we call the State Arts Agency, which is the federally authorized state arts agency for the state of New Mexico. Every state has one, plus 6 US jurisdictions. All of them are the folks who were set up in 1965, whether they existed before or were created at that point, following the establishment of the NEA to be the conduits through which NEA, National Endowment for the Arts funds are channeled into each state, excluding when organizations apply directly to NEA for funding. So every year, 40% of the National Endowment for the Arts budget is set aside for what they call partnership funding, which is what the state arts agency funding is. As the regional arts organizations, there are I think 5 of those, they all get some money too from that partnership. For us right now, that's about $900,000 that comes in from the feds through our division. We are a division of the Department of Cultural Affairs, but often because the Department of Cultural Affairs is actually the largest department of its kind in the country, and New Mexico has the largest state-run museum system in the country, we often get lost in the larger concept of the Department of Cultural Affairs. Cultural Affairs is 8 museums and 8 historic sites, state libraries, Historic Preservation Division, Office of Archaeology. So there's a lot going on, and we are actually the smallest division in that large department. But we, as the New Mexico Arts Division, we are the state arts agency individually, not as a collective with DCA. And we are the division that is doing work that is most similar to what a creative industries division will also be doing from an economic development perspective. So our goal, our mission, as it's stated in our strategic plan, is to, okay, wait, I know our vision by heart, but I always get the mission wrong. Let me read it out so I can do it correctly. Our mission, as it stands now, is, of course, it's going to be at the back of my thing here. And it's on a different screen. Well, essentially, what our task is, and I'll pull up that mission for you, is to combine that federal money with state money. The state is required to match that federal grant to New Mexico Arts at least 1-to-1. In New Mexico, we are overmatched, which is great. There are states that fight for matching every year, and we are not one of those. We're very fortunate. We're about in the middle of the pack as to what the state gives to the arts division. So it's different in all states, but we're right about in the middle. A poll just popped up.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's just for folks to complete at their convenience as they're listening.
So our mission is public support for the arts to ensure the arts are central to the lives of New Mexicans. So for us, the end goal to the work we do is to ensure that there is arts activity available to all New Mexicans. And we do that through funding with the grants, the NEA and general fund money I mentioned. The public art program is a very large program in New Mexico, the Percent for Art program. That's $1 million to $2 million a year in public art acquisitions for sites around the state. So that not only benefits the public in that people get to enjoy that art, but we're paying artists to make or to buy that art, which is wonderful. We have Folk Art Apprentice Master Program, which is a very small program, but a very significant one. We do a lot of organizational development work for nonprofit organizations. I didn't mention our funding is for nonprofit, government, and public education institutions. So that's where our focus sits. We do not work with the for-profit sector. We are the nonprofit sector. But really the goal of all of these things, Governor's Arts Awards, Poet Laureate, Poetry Out Loud, Arts and Cultural Districts, all of the Governor's Arts Awards for Excellence in the Arts, the State Arts Commission and the State Music Commission reside within our purview. So we do a lot of things in that area. Where there is, I think, overlap is in that idea of funding for the sector. And so we're sort of working now that creative industries has been created and they're beginning to have their staffing getting ready to be put in place. And we can actually start talking now with real humans who work there about what it looks like going forward. How do we, the way I've started thinking about it really this week, honestly, as part of these conversations, which has been very helpful and enlightening, is that we are two sides of the same coin. So we are, I wouldn't say we are exclusively supporting the nonprofit sector, but that is a major part of our world. We are not necessarily about workforce development, about economic stimulus, although the work that we do does result in those things because the nonprofit sector is actually a major contributor to the arts economy in New Mexico, contrary to popular belief. And the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study 6, which I know Mike has a link to, and he'll probably pop it in the chat, that kind of demonstrates that data. It bears out that the nonprofit sector is pretty valuable. And even that, you know, our small amount of money, we grant about $1 million a year. That $1 million, if we look at the last, not the last 3 years, but if we look at, say, fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2022, New Mexico Arts invested about $4 million in the sector with that grant program. So that's nonprofit, government, and public education grants. And the return on investment was $141 million in spending. That was leveraged into $141 million of spending. So we recognize the economic value of the nonprofit sector, although that is not our primary goal. It's a very lovely side benefit to the work that we do, which is to ensure that New Mexicans have access to the arts. So we're super excited about creative industries and how we can partner and collaborate and raise all boats by making that funding go up, up, up across the board, so that not only can we generate a lot of business and economy and economic prosperity around the sector, but we can also ensure that there is stuff being presented that is accessible to the public and it doesn't become a very exclusive club. So that our main focus is making sure that New Mexicans have access to the arts in our state and it doesn't become some kind of exclusionary thing. And I think we can work together to make some really good stuff happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to shout out two things, Artist Inc., which you can learn more about, and I'm not going to try to describe it all, but it is a partnership, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, a partnership between New Mexico Arts and the Mid-America Artist Alliance, right?
Yeah, Mid-America Arts Alliance has a program called Artist Inc., which is a professional development training program for artists. They based it on the individual artists. It's based on the Creative Capital professional development program. That's where it came out of that. And basically we contract with them to provide those programs around the state. This year we did 3. One's coming up, but Las Cruces, Albuquerque, and Gallup. Weekend ones, we'll be doing the big intensive one next year is the plan. Cool. They're really wonderful. And I also forgot to mention the Artists in Residence program, which is very small. It's a rural artist residency, but it's a decent fellowship for an artist to be in residence at a state historic site for 6 weeks.
Which, as Michelle said, there are many in New Mexico. Yeah. And so I just wanted to shout out those opportunities for individual artists and also shout out the New Mexico Music Commission, which we just had a panel yesterday with Carlos and Buddy, and they are sort of part of New Mexico Arts, right? Kind of. I know it's more complicated than that, but they're doing great work.
They're administratively attached the way something like Spaceport or the State Fair are attached to other divisions. They're attached to us. So they have to come through me to be part of the department.
Got it. I just wanted to shout those out as opportunities for individual artists. So yeah, thank you so much, Michelle, for talking about that. So moving along the story, individual artists, opportunities as they grow and think about it. Inevitably, a question that comes up pretty soon is, in thinking about their business, is, all right, my art is my intellectual property. How do I protect that? And that's why we're very excited to be joined by Max Haas, who is a specialist in that. And we had a great conversation about that, about some of the issues from Max's background that are particularly resonant for artists and creatives in New Mexico. And so I'm really, really delighted to have Max on this webinar today. So welcome, Max. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, so my whole career as an attorney has been focused on working with creatives. I am a musician myself. I've been playing bass since I was 11 years old, which would make it about 23 years or so. And so when I decided to kind of start down this path, I was not someone who just wanted to go to law school to become a lawyer. I wanted to work with creative people and be an advocate for them. And I've through a somewhat unconventional career path thus far managed to be able to stay focused on that goal. So everything that I've done in my practice has been centered around that question that Mike just asked, is that for an artist, how do they protect themselves? And more importantly, how does that protection allow them to actually sustain themselves from their artwork? I think that is the piece of it that I think maybe is implied, but not always explicitly asked. And in some ways that's more important, right? Because vast majority of the time you are not going to get your stuff infringed. You're not going to have to file a lawsuit against somebody. But what's more important is your ability to get paid for the projects that you create, to be able to control what happens to that work after it already exists so that you can license it, you can negotiate terms, things along those lines. I have a little 3-year-old visitor behind me. Sorry. He loves inserting himself whenever I'm on Zoom calls. I apologize. But the basic 3 elements there are copyrights, trademarks, and business entities. One thing that I try to convey to artists all the time is that even though what you're doing is something that you're passionate about, something that you relate very closely to your identity as a person, if you're trying to do it full time, you have to treat it like a business in some way or another. And yes, there are grants for artists and other things that are not necessarily available to more conventional types of businesses. But in terms of protecting yourself with contracts and things like that, having some sort of business entity is usually an important first piece in that whole equation. And that can take the form of an LLC, it can take the form of a corporation. There's a couple of different ways you can go about it. If you have collaborators, business partners, it gets a little bit more complicated because then you need to use something like an operating agreement or bylaws to make sure that you have some internal governance and make sure that everybody's on the same page as to how you're going to conduct that art business. And then the other major piece is the copyright side of it. So every artist is creating copyrights anytime they finish a new work. And this could be visual art, this could be film, this could be music, this could be writing. There's a wide range of creative endeavors that are covered by copyrightable subject matter. And there are a number of default provisions in the copyright statute. First of all, let me make clear that copyright is federal and it applies the same way everywhere in the country. There's some exceptions to that when you get into, court cases, and different federal circuits have different ways they interpret things, but the copyright statute covers the whole country and applies the same way. And so one of those default rules is that artists have a copyright as soon as the work is fixed in the tangible medium of expression. So one common misconception is that you're not protected until you go and take this additional proactive step of registering your copyright. And that's not actually true. You do have those rights just by having created the work.
Can you say that again, Max, that exact sentence? Artists have a copyright as soon as the work is fixed.
Artists have a copyright as soon as the work is fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So cool. Registration does bring some important additional benefits. And I always recommend to clients that they register their copyrights, and we can work out ways to sort of streamline that so that you're not filing, 40 separate applications for 40 separate works. There's ways you can combine things into single forms. But by having that understanding and protection and control over your copyrights, you're then able to negotiate how you want the works to be licensed out to someone else, what that person can do with the license once they have it. Or if you want to sell the rights to your work to somebody, you can do that as well. But again, knowing the basics of how that works is hugely important in empowering the artist to know how to have those conversations and know the right questions to ask and know what things to push back on. And these contracts can come up in a variety of ways, right? It can be a large, well-funded entity or person that is hiring an artist for some sort of commissioned work, or it can be an artist who already has a body of work and there are people out there who are interested in licensing it and using it in a film or getting prints made or printing it onto consumer products or a variety of different things that can be done there. But the analogy that I often make is that if you were, you know, a real estate developer, you're not necessarily an attorney. You have your own attorney. You don't necessarily need to know the law at the same level of detail as your real estate attorney does. But given that your business involves buying and selling property, you need to have a basic understanding of how that property law works, of how zoning laws work, things like that, right? And the same should be true for artists and copyright, because every single one of your works of art has its own copyright. You are creating copyrights as your practice, right? And so I've often taught workshops on this, and I'm, you know, always trying to share this information with artists. And Mike mentioned that I did have a unique experience. I went to law school in New Orleans at Tulane, and I had the opportunity while living in New Orleans. I live in Denver now, but when I was living in New Orleans, I had the opportunity to work with a number of members of a really unique subculture in the city called Mardi Gras Indians. And there's a long, complicated history. And I'm glad to see that some people on this panel know about Mardi Gras Indians. Could you excuse me for just one?
Yeah, sure. I also want to say that Max's group also is, in addition to being based in Denver, like also based in Albuquerque. And one of the partners is in Albuquerque, just in case people were like, what's this Denver? What's this Denver
Oh,
doing?
yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
so we
Yeah.
got, yeah, it is
Yeah.
based in Albuquerque as well.
One of my
Yeah.
partners is in Albuquerque. We as a firm have a presence in a number of states. We also have a partner in Arizona. And I personally have some really good friends who live in New Mexico. And in the 5 years of living in Denver, I think I've visited New Mexico like 10 times at this point. So I'm really glad to be able to connect with people in the New Mexico community here. So Mardi Gras Indians have an interesting story where, you know, there's this long history of what is primarily a ceremonial ritual, but because it occurs out in public in the streets of New Orleans, there was often this misunderstanding of whether it was in fact protectable artwork or whether it was just people wearing costumes. And so, but there are these incredible works of art. I mean, they literally take an entire year to make by hand. There's an incredible amount of sewing involved, very tiny beads, hundreds of feathers, really intricate pieces that are created every single year by dozens of people around the city. And because of the bright colors and the designs, they've attracted the interest of photographers who would take their pictures and then turn around and sell posters and calendars and other things. And none of that was flowing back to the artists at all. One of my law professors had worked with the Mardi Gras Indians to actually get the first copyright registration of a Mardi Gras Indian suit by arguing that it is a sculpture rather than a piece of clothing. And that by itself is enough to really change the landscape of where the leverage is and what the artists are able to do in then negotiating control over the use of that image. So protection is certainly an element of it, but also being able to have control over the work is, I would argue, probably the more important factor there. The one other area that I'll touch on briefly is trademarks. So, plenty of people develop a brand around what they're doing. In the music world, any band name is a trademark, basically. Plenty of artists will develop a name for their studio that is separate from their own name. And that can be a valuable, protectable thing as well. And so to invest in and take steps to protect your trademark rights will also allow you to really carve out that unique space for yourself in the marketplace.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Max. That's, I mean, obviously huge topic, lots to dive into more, and I encourage folks. But I think, yeah, wow, so many things in that are so important. So here we are in the story. Let's say that you are an individual artist. You've gone through one of New Mexico Arts, say like Artist Inc. workshops, for example. You're rolling along. You've figured out some of the basics, like Max said. If you're an artist, just the same way. If you're a property owner, you need to know a little bit about property law. You figured that out. You're doing really well with your art idea, with your creative entrepreneurship, and lo and behold, it comes time to think about scaling, think about buying a building or all sorts of things to scale your business up. And that's when you might get in touch with, you might interact with some of the programs through an organization like Henry Jake Foreman's New Mexico Community Capital, for which Henry Jake is a program director. So Henry Jake Foreman is going to tell us now a little bit about that part of it when you end up showing up at the door of the bank. So thank you so much for being here, Henry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. My name is Henry Jake Foreman. I'm born and raised here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm absentee Shawnee from Oklahoma, as well as Filipino and Scots-Irish. And I just wanted to share that because I just want to add that kind of layer of diversity and complexity to this, conversation, right? We got a long history, a long and complicated history. And I'm glad, even with the Mardi Gras Indians, right? Like, my talk at Google was indigenous cultures are the original source code. And I don't just mean that by Native Americans in particular, but we've lived here for thousands and thousands of years and built up all of these things, including technology, art, creative industry. So I bring that by because I think it's also important to just recognize that, right? Recognize where we are, recognize the place that we're at. And here in New Mexico in 2024, there's still a lot of silos that happen, including with banks, with other organizations. So when people come to our organization, they first want to build relation, right? And I think that's the first thing that a lot of banks especially don't start with, right? Of just basically being able to build that relationship. And that's how we do that at New Mexico Community Capital. We get a sense of what are the needs of the entrepreneurs. A lot of times we go straight to access to capital, I'm scaling. Well, I'll say that a lot of people come to us to basically say, hey, you know what? How do I protect myself, right? Online? How do I learn about technology tools? And really, how do I sustain myself and really build the vision out? Because the vision is beyond the artwork and the transaction. The vision is usually, how do I take care of my family, right? How do I sustain the legacy of myself, of our culture, of our language? And so, it's a big shift. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people, especially Native American entrepreneurs, don't feel comfortable in a lot of spaces, right? Like banks, like institutions, because they didn't see themselves represented in it. And so we kind of are that alternative. And so some of our programs, we have a business and marketing essentials program to just get people online. There are serious barriers, access to resources, even technology. I don't have to share with you all. We rank the lowest in all of these things, from education to income to health. So these are all things that we have to think about when we're building program. So the first thing, right? All free. Every type of program we do is all free. Every program since our existence for over 20 years has actually paid entrepreneurs and paid creatives. I haven't seen that in many other organizations where we actually give financial and cash incentives right away, because we know that that's a barrier. Even to come to our office, sometimes people are traveling 4 hours away, right? So we make sure that we have that ample amount of resource to support. We've given out literally now hundreds of laptops, especially during the pandemic. We knew that digital literacy is inherently connected to financial and business literacy. So we knew that right away we wanted to make sure that we could leapfrog in technology, right? So this past week we worked in the Pueblo of Jemez with their vocation and rehabilitation program. So folks that have disabilities, some cases long-term COVID, things like that. And we saw people literally their first time on a laptop within 1 hour built out a full business plan with financial statements and projections. So tools like AI, these are things that we have to talk about. These are things that we have to utilize. And then these are things that we have to, really understand the complexity, right? Talking about intellectual property, what happens when you use these tools, who owns that data. So we see a cycle, and I'll just call it out, a cycle of exploitation, maybe a cycle of colonization that continues to happen because we're not addressing the fundamental worldview that we have, right? I'm gonna chart because I know I'm with my fellow creatives and artists, William Blank. Art degraded, imagination denied, war governed the nations. Sounds familiar, right? So we've degraded art, right? And creatives. And that's where we need to start, right? Like, how do we shift the worldview to really value arts and creatives? And that's really the fundamental challenge that we have right here in the 21st century. Because if we think of art as just something pretty, well, guess what? AI can make probably some really pretty things, but is that valuable? And so, again, how do we shift perspective and mindset? That's what we focus on. And we focus on narrative and story. And that is the key thing that has really helped our entrepreneurs scale to businesses, to art galleries, to other places. We've helped people build their story arc and their story that really matches how our brains learn and build empathy. So for me, that's a big part of it, right? It's probably different than the talk I was going to share about how you could access capital, right? But that story arc is fundamental because it really helps people understand the value that they do, but also is a pitch. It's Shark Tank. How do you put together a business plan? All right, now let's go into financials, right? A lot of times there is such thing as financial trauma, historical financial trauma. So we have to take a really holistic approach when we're talking about financial statements, right? We do it through a conversation, right? Kitchen table dialogues where we talked about money. How is money like growing up? What happens when you get money? For me, I spend it, right? How do I shift those habits, right? And then I think about the bigger goal. What's the bigger goal that you want? Do you want a studio? Do you want to increase your production? Do you want to scale and manufacture as many products? The answer is yes to all the above for a lot of people, but even a simpler answer is, how do I make this, how do I make a lifestyle that works for me? Because the reality is we're still recovering from the pandemic, but I'll just put it out there. We're still recovering from colonization, for hundreds of years. So we need more injection of resource. We need more programs like myself, like everyone here on this panel right now, because that is where we're at. It's a real challenge right now. And I'm not going to lie and say that it's so easy to make a living as a creative because it's getting more and more challenging. Cost of goods is going up. Inflation is going up. How do we compete with people like Amazon and all of these, other online stores that don't value the work and time? So that's the conversations that we have in our classes. We come up with community action projects, so how do we change that? So for instance, a community action project that evolved is our First Friday Art Market here happening in Albuquerque. We need spaces. We need more opportunities for people to vend and sell their products and meet customers. I was late 4 minutes because we were hosting an international group that are wanting to come in and do more type of conferences and tourism. And that's something that we really all need to talk about, right? Because that's going to be a huge opportunity. It still is, continue to be for New Mexico. People want to come here because they want the culture. And we have to be able to understand, how do we build this culture that's inclusive, that's diverse, it's also maybe, not sometimes fun to talk about, but is also, part of our culture. And I think lastly, I'll end it. with this idea of going back to indigenous cultures are the original source code. We have some of the best artists in the world, no doubt about it. I mean, come on, right? We have some of the most creative people in here. And the best thing that we can do is continue to work with them and listen to their needs. I would love to have some type of emergency fund for these individuals at the minimum, because challenges like crime and property crime are like what we're seeing, right? Preventable diseases, health challenges, or it's really preventing a lot of folks from going to that next level. So if we're not getting our basic needs met, we're going to continue to see those challenges. So it's a holistic plan. I'm glad that we're talking about that. It needs to be a holistic plan that incorporates all of this when we're talking about creatives, because the challenges are great, but I will say, you know, what better group of people than creatives and artists to really meet that challenge?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Henry. Yeah, that's really, really well said. I just in that talk, I want to throw a few things out based on what you said. One, on this idea, I really love the way you put it. Indigenous cultures are the original source code. It reminds me of yesterday, we had a really wonderful panel discussion with Kelly Holmes of Native Max and Tewa Women United. And Kathy Sanchez of Tewa Women United was talking about the Circle of Grandmothers program. And one thing, I mean, they do a million things that are amazing, but one thing they did that was super smart was that they did a collective loan structure where basically they all took out the loan together, and then paying back the loan together, they were able to build everyone's credit. And I was like, oh, what an amazing, like, practical application of these values, this original source code. And then two, just another thing, just to make people feel a little better about AI and all that, one thing that we've seen in our research is that Gen Z consumers, not the the youth are going to save us, but Gen Z consumers are far and away very different than my generation or older generations, in that the numbers around what they say about craving authentic experiences and authentic relationships in the things they consume, and their ability to recognize and reject AI art, it's like pretty encouraging.
Right.
So it sort of just popped into my head. It's associative. And I also, yeah, I wanna make sure that we have time, because I know we're sort of rolling along with a few more panelists than we normally have. And so after you have gone to Artist Inc., after you've figured out how to protect your work, after you've talked to New Mexico Community Capital, where all the programs are free and pay entrepreneurs, which was really cool to learn, then you're like, you know what? I'm into it. I want to start advocating with my fellow creatives for a better future for all creatives in New Mexico. And that's where you might interact with a wonderful organization called Creative New Mexico. And we have LAURIE RUFE here from Creative New Mexico to tell us a little bit about that organization, about its work getting this division passed, and about the future of advocating for creatives in New Mexico.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, it's great to join this group, and I'm amazed at what's happening in this whole sphere. It's just exhilarating. Creative New Mexico is an organization that's been around for a while, but it's sort of flown under the radar. And we really got sort of geared up during the last couple of years working on the creative industries division. And really, the division exists because of advocacy, really. Certainly because of vision as well, but advocacy played a great part. And Creative New Mexico is an all-volunteer organization that advocates for art and culture interests across the state. And nationally, we work with the Americans for the Arts. And regionally, we partner with Western States Arts Federation. And West Staff actually convenes 13 arts advocacy organizations across the West to work on federal and state issues, and also to support our state arts agency like New Mexico Arts. and Michelle is on the West Staff board. We have a bunch of overarching goals, but one of the most important is to encourage elected officials to support increased public funding and legislation for the arts. So that leads us to House Bill 8. And the Creative Industries Bill that was introduced by Representative Rena Sapansky of Santa Fe and Senator Jeff Steinborn of Las Cruces. And that was introduced in the legislature in 2023. But work on the Creative Industries Division actually began in late 2021 with a small group of arts leaders that were operating as the Creative Industries Consortium. And several members actually connected with Rena Sapansky at a campaign event and inspired her to focus on legislative investment in the creative industries and also the formation of a creative industries division that could be placed under the Economic Development Department. And Senator Steinborn, as a longtime creative industries advocate and originator of the Outdoor Recreation Division, was quick to join the cause. And he was a great leader in terms of his previous commitment to building a new division under EDD. The Creative Industries Consortium was really a powerful group of women, 7 individuals. Sabrina Pratt, I want to name them because they are just amazing ladies. Sabrina Pratt, Loie Fecteau, and Cindy Graves of Santa Fe, Irene Oliver Lewis from Las Cruces, Rose Eason of Gallup, and also a Creative New Mexico board member, and Anne Green Romig of Albuquerque, and then me from Roswell. So it was a diverse group in different locations across the state, which was very important. This was the core advocacy and facilitation group, along with the representative and the senator. Everyone contributed in countless ways based on their expertise. Getting the bill together, we were really trying to do it by 2022, but that was impossible. And so we focused on 2023. And to lay the groundwork, we conducted research, gathered Bureau of Economic Analysis and UNM Bureau of Business and Economic Research data, and talked to colleagues in other states that had launched successful legislative industry legislation. In mid-2022, Creative New Mexico launched a little targeted survey to determine how individuals would use funding from a creative industries division. And we found out that the top 5 needs identified were marketing, organizational capacity and sustainability, arts education, infrastructure and placemaking improvements, and workforce training and development. And that helped to distill.
Can you say that one more time, Laurie? Sorry, just those 5 so I can put it in the chat for everybody.
It's marketing, organizational capacity and sustainability, arts education, infrastructure and placemaking improvements, and workforce training and development. And that really helped us distill what the bill was going to be about. We also identified at the same time passionate supporters from across the state that could serve as advocates. They told their stories, they spread the word on social media, they took action on the voter voice platform that we operate under Creative New Mexico. They wrote letters and emails, made phone calls to legislators and the governor, provided testimony during the hearings, and endorsements at the Roundhouse press conference for the bill. It was amazing what people were motivated to do. House bill passed with huge bipartisan support, and it was signed into law. And I want to thank, I'm sure there are people out in the audience that were advocates for that bill. So thank you so much. You made it happen. The initial funding was for $2 million, and it was non-recurring. It was 1.8 million, which was directed at those 18 grants of $100,000 each, 50% to be for rural and underserved communities, which is a real unique aspect of that grant, of that bill. And as we learned in the first Zoom session of this Creative Industries Week, the 18 grant projects in this first cycle were diverse and impactful, infusing communities with art and providing pathways for creative entrepreneurs, businesses, and workers. And then the remaining funds were,
Oh, I think we lost you, Laurie. Oh, you went on mute.
just
Oh, sorry.
muted myself. It's really a good thing. But anyway, Creative Startups was awarded the contract to do listening sessions and develop a plan and a vision for the creative industries division. And I want to thank Alice Loy, who heads this organization, for her contributions to helping us build the bill that was passed. And then we did work again with the senator and the representative to fight for CID's fiscal year 25 budget request. And that was for recurring support, 2 full-time positions, and 500,000 in operating. And the legislature actually approved the first 2 things. I mean, the recurring support is great. They only approved, though, 200,000 in operating. So we have more work to do. So I know we're running out of time. So I want to say that I did enter into the chat Creative New Mexico's website, and also nmlegis.gov, which is our legislative website as well. That's an important website to access to learn out who your lawmakers are, what the committees are composed of, hearings, bills that are taking place. You can actually attend those meetings. On the state level, Representative Zepansky and Senator Steinborn have become amazing champions for the arts. Creative New Mexico has been honored to work with them. As they stated in their session on Wednesday, growing the CID is a priority, but it will take time. Another focus that they are planning to work on, and I think this is very important, is to promote within our legislators an understanding and appreciation for what the arts bring to our communities, creating a group of educated and engaged legislator advocates. We don't have too many of them. So I think this is a very exciting time for our creative industries. The listening session that was held in Roswell was so exciting. I was just charged up after it. The statewide conversation has a capacity to link our separate little islands of interest and endeavor together, making us stronger, more connected, and successful. And the national efforts that are out there, like the one that Representative Teresa Ledger Fernandez has proposed, is the Creative Workforce Investment Act. I think that what the CID and New Mexico Arts are doing can parallel, reinforce, and amplify the Creative Workforce Investment Act if it gets passed. So we want you to advocate for that when the time comes. In closing, I just want to say, please seek out your elected officials, build relationships, share your success stories, thank them, develop economic and education impact statements to detail your community contributions. Our website has samples of those that you can create. Plus, we have a whole advocacy section with all sorts of resources. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laurie. That's a wonderful, I mean, what a great illustration of all the work that your organization has done to get this passed. And I'm not allowed to tell anyone what to do because I'm under contract with the state. But I think that if folks want to connect and with your organization and work together, I will say, you know, just based on research, traveling around doing these listening sessions, I have been struck by just how important it is, because in this story that we've told today, right? You start out as an individual artist, you go through like an Artist Inc., a New Mexico arts program, you figure out how to protect your work, you know, with copyright law. You talk to an organization like New Mexico Community Capital to figure out a business plan or scale. And then that final piece, I think, is, in my experience, can be sort of maybe contrary to the artist mindset, right? We make art for ourselves, we make art for our audiences, and it's easy to feel like, oh, I'm just an individual artist. But there is so much power in joining together with your fellow creatives across genre, across medium. I remember going to Farmington with my colleague Rashawn Ahmad, and we talked to some local musicians, some local metal musicians, and they were, you know, they were saying that they had these frustrations with the city shutting down their shows, and these frustrations that they only talked about with themselves. And then Rashawn and I were talking about them, and we said, well, is this music like helpful for you? Is it healthy for you? And they're like, oh yeah, it's like mental health, 100%. And we said, have you thought about positioning what you do as mental health? And they were like, oh, we hadn't thought about that. And like, have you connected with other artists to advocate for art as mental health? And they were like, oh no, we haven't done that. And part of it is like they all also working in construction or in restaurants, and they just don't have time. But it's so important, I think, for creatives to join together. And that's really the final piece of business thinking and advocacy, is to join together and advocate together. Because that's really what's going to get stuff done and what's going to change people's minds. So we have a few questions here for our last few minutes in the chat. We have a shout out to Jake for helping grow business with laptops and art walks. So shout out to Mexico Community Capital and Jake from Joseph. And then we have some folks just wanting people's contact info just because, which is great. They just want to keep rolling and keep these conversations going. And we're really happy that the folks on this panel have been so open. And yeah, I felt stressed about time, and now I find myself with 4 minutes left over. And so I know Jake, Henry, I'm sorry if I was saying we had never met before, so I didn't know if it was Jake or Henry. But Jake, you were about to say something earlier, so I want to hand that back over to you.
Sure. I mean, as we're talking about this digital age and things like AI, I think it's really important for us to just continue to be in those conversations, be in those spaces. You mentioned, I just did a talk in Washington, D.C. with Google and Google civil rights and congressional leaders, and it's really scary. It's something that I'm proud of, and it took me about a week and a half to even make that post because of how controversial, AI is specifically for artists and indigenous communities. But we have to be in those spaces and share our stories and talk about the challenges as well as the opportunities, because it is a tool. And I'm not saying it's a neutral tool, but it's a tool that can be used, and we need to teach ourselves how to use it, and ideally, be able to talk about that as a larger group of people here in New Mexico. But I like the dorky parts of it. I like the simple, the workflow part of it, and that's what I'm really sticking to, is like, how do we automate the way that we can do all these things that is not natural? Like, I'm an artist as well. So I don't like to deal with taxes. I don't like to do the projections. I don't like to do the self-marketing, but it's a part of this new reality and landscape. So it's something that I wasn't originally passionate about, but now that I'm learning more, going back to your idea of talking about Table Women United, we're doing something similar where we're really talking about how do we share our governance across our participants. Because someone told me this, and it was really hard to swallow. Sharing space without sharing power is just another form of tokenism. And that hit me hard, of like, you could re-grant and you could provide access, but like, if we're not bringing in people's voices and decision making into that process, then what are we doing? So we've been exploring new technologies to really incorporate more indigenous governance as it relates to sharing grants, building programs, building a fund out, because we believe in that as well. Like my tribe, Tecumseh mentioned, one arrow breaks really easily, but a quill of arrows is harder to break. And I think that's really what we're all talking about, right? Like, if we're united, then we're going to be that much stronger. So.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. Yeah, thank you so much, Jake, for saying that. And that feels like a good spot to leave us at. I mean, I've noticed all week one thing that strikes me about New Mexico, as someone not from New Mexico, but spent a lot of time there. My partner grew up in Espanola, and that it's a place where the interaction with deep history and deep future is just tangible every day. It's New Mexico just doesn't care about right now, which I think is so beautiful. It cares about where we're coming from and where we're going. And I think if like the creatives and artists in New Mexico are already like just harnessing that, and I think the more that artists and creatives in New Mexico come together to harness that and get supported by all these great organizations, New Mexico Arts, Creative New Mexico Community Capital, and Holon. I feel like I can't shout out Holon Law quite as like is because it's it's a private law firm, but all the great work being done by lawyers and advocates like Max in New Mexico, that's going to help everybody. So thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you so much to Michelle and to Max and to Jake and to Laurie for sharing. Just really great. I encourage people, we are going to send out an email with everybody's contact info, encourage people to get in touch. And yeah, thank you so much. This was really great. I'm really happy. Thank you all for being here. Off we go to our next panels here at 3 o'clock. Thank you so much. Take care.